Hi guys, it's Miss Fogarty here. Today we are reading lesson number 8 in listening and learning called Cesar Chavez, Protector of Workers' Rights. When I'm reading today, there are going to be 3 main vocab words we're focusing on. The first vocab word is migrant workers. Migrant workers are people who travel from one area to another, usually in search of work such as harvesting or growing crops. The second vocab word we're going to focus on today is the word plight. Plight means a very difficult or bad situation. The third vocab word we're looking for today when I'm reading is the word strikes. Those are stoppages of works until those in a position of power, such as employers, grant certain demands such as higher pay or better working conditions. So people will go on something called a strike if they feel like they're not being treated fairly, if they want more money as a company, and it means they'll basically stop working until the bosses of that company give them what they want. Again, those 3 vocab words are migrant workers, polite, and strikes. When we hear those in the story today, we are going to stop and we're going to kind of talk about them a little bit more. And if you hear them while I'm reading, tapping your head tells Miss Fogarty that you are catching the words and you're listening for them as I'm reading. This first picture here is of Mr. Cesar Chavez. Cesar Estrada Chavez was born in 1927 in the Gila River Valley near Yuma, Arizona. As the second of 6 children, Cesar and his siblings loved to explore the golden desert landscape and gaze up at the sparkling desert sky, which seemed to stretch on forever. Cesar was named after his grandfather, who had come to the United States from Mexico in 1880s. Cesar's grandfather had settled on a small ranch in the Gila River Valley. This was the very same ranch on which Cesar and his family now lived and worked. The Chavez family worked very hard and their farm was prosperous, meaning thriving, and they made a lot of money. Then tragedy struck. Rain stopped falling in the river valley, first one year and then the next. Without rain, crops can't grow, and eventually the cattle or the cows died. This was also the time of the Great Depression, and Cesar's family, like so many others, lost their home. There was nothing they could do but sell the ranch. And so, when he was 10 years old, Cesar and his family moved to California and became migrant workers, or remember, people who traveled from farm to farm, picking fruits and vegetables during harvest time. Like most migrant workers, Cesar and his family were poor, and they were often treated unfairly by the people who hired them. They were paid a very small amount of money for the work that they did, and the work was extremely hard, so they weren't very respected for the work they were doing. Cesar and his family had to live in many different migrant worker camps. The camps were overcrowded, and many families had to share just one bathroom. The Chavez family missed their ranch. They dreamed of going back to Arizona one day and buying back their home. However, migrant workers earned just a few cents a day for the backbreaking work that they did. There was no chance that they'd ever be able to save enough money. Cesar's family was considered to be Hispanic because they originated from a Spanish-speaking country of Mexico. Hispanic or Latino people, like African Americans, faced discrimination and segregation. So we know that African Americans face discrimination and segregation, but also Hispanic or Latino people were also segregated and discriminated against as well. However, Cesar's family celebrated their Mexican heritage and spoke Spanish, the language of their ancestral home. Although it wasn't easy, Cesar did go to school in various places in California. In fact, he went to more than 30 different schools. He later said that he was lucky to have graduated from middle school because his family moved around so much. Later in his life, Cesar told a story about an incident that happened to him at school. One day, Cesar accidentally spoke Spanish instead of English in his classroom. His teacher was not happy with him, and Cesar thought that he had done something wrong. Cesar felt that he was being treated unfairly, and it made him feel very sad. It was not possible for Cesar to go to high school. He needed to work in the fields. However, during World War II, Cesar wanted to serve his country. He joined the Navy and his family became very proud of him. After 2 years of work in the United States Navy, Cesar returned to life as a migrant farm worker. Soon after his return, Cesar met and fell in love with Helen Fabello. The couple married and moved to San Jose, California. Cesar was one of many Latino people who worked as a migrant worker, moving from farm to harvest crops and vegetables. The work was so hard, and the hours were so long, that many workers found that their health began to suffer from it. So start to think, if you're working all day long, the time the sun rises in the morning until the time the sun sets at night, in fields where there's no shade, imagine the health problems that these people are going through. They worked 7 days a week, no days off, often 14 hours a day, and they weren't paid very much for their work. If they were injured or became sick, they found it difficult to pay medical bills. These migrant workers were only employed during harvest time, and of course, migrant workers didn't earn money when the weather was bad and they couldn't work, while waiting for their crops to ripen or when they traveled from job to job. Cesar believed that something has to change. He believed that these migrant workers deserved to be treated more fairly. He set out to change the treatment of farm workers and especially migrant workers in California. So Cesar's growing up his whole entire life experiencing this. He once had a successful farm and then very, very bad things happened. There was a drought. His family lost a lot of money during the Great Depression and they had to sell their farm. So they became migrant workers. And while he's growing up as a migrant worker and he's seeing all of these unfair things going on, he's starting to realize, you know what, something's got to change. I have to be the one to stand up and say, we're not going to work for this little of money. We need better working conditions. We need to be paid more money. So Cesar is going to be the guy that kind of stands up for these migrant workers and tries to fight for a change. One day, Cesar met with an organization for a social service group called the Community Service Organization, also known as the CSO. This organization also wanted to improve the lives of Latino people. Cesar volunteered to be the CSO organizer. He went from farm to farm, helping some farm workers with their day-to-day problems and instructing others on how to become United States citizens. He encouraged all farm workers to register to vote, and he helped them register to vote as well. Immediately, some of the farm owners thought that Cesar was a troublemaker. Cesar was shy, and he didn't like to speak in front of large groups of people, but he knew that his work was important. He became the leader of the new CSO group in California. In addition to speaking Spanish, he also spoke very good English. As a result, he was able to communicate with both farm workers, those who spoke English, and the farm workers that also spoke only Spanish. Slowly, many farm workers became brave enough to attend his meetings and rallies that he organized. Without intending to, Cesar became a labor leader and a civil rights activist. So he wants a change, but he's also not like Martin Luther King Jr. He's not going to get up in front of a podium and speak to hundreds of thousands of people. He would hold these little meetings, as you can see in the picture, under a tree on the farm, and a couple people would join, and he would kind of say, you know what, do this to become a U.S. citizen. Vote for your leaders. He would try to help them out, and by doing so, more people decided, hey, I'm gonna go to one of his meetings. And eventually, he became a really, really big leader and an activist fighting for all of these people. Cesar believed that all farm workers needed a union to represent their best interest. A union is a large, organized group of workers who join together and elect leaders to speak for them. The union leaders try to make sure the members' needs are being met. Cesar knew that a union would have the power to increase money or pay and provide healthcare workers healthcare for farm workers. And so he and his friend Dolores decided to set up a union called the National Farm Workers Association. Cesar said, "You are never strong enough that you don't need help," and the union was intended to provide that help. Within 2 years, it had over 1,000 members. Cesar thought thought Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had the right idea about protesting in a nonviolent way. He decided to do the same exact thing. He led marches, fasts, and boycotts, but never held violent protests. So he's following along with Dr. Martin Luther King. He saw him protest without using fighting, without using weapons, and it worked. So he said, you know what? I'm not going to go to a store and physically fight someone or use a weapon. I'm just going to protest. I'm just going to tell everyone what I want, walk holding street signs, things like that to get my point across. One of the most important farm workers' strikes Cesar led was against a group of grape growers in California. At that time, Cesar said, "The fight is never about grapes or lettuce. It's about the people." The strike began in Delano, California, where grape growers had decided to cut the little pay that farm workers received, so workers were earning even less money than before. Cesar responded by organizing not only a strike, but a protest march, too. Thousands of farm workers set off for the state capital of Sacramento. They walked for hours each day in the hot sunshine. More and more workers left the vineyards and joined in the march. People across the nation noticed what was happening. Many people refused to buy California grapes in sympathy for the plight of workers. Remember, plight means a bad situation. So there's a group of grape growers, a group of people that work in the fields growing grapes. And the bosses, or the people that owned the farm, said, I'm going to pay you even less money. They're already making a small amount. So Cesar organized a protest. They all got in one big group and they marched. They said, nope, we're not working for this little of money. You need to pay us more. And they wanted to march to the state capital of Sacramento up here. So they start all the way in the south of California and they walk just with their feet, and it gets a lot of people's attention. And people that don't necessarily live in California see this and they said, wow, what that California grape company is doing is horrible. We're going to stop buying their grapes because we don't like what they're doing. While farm workers were marching, they weren't harvesting the valuable grapes. The farm owners watched in horror as their precious crops withered and died on the vine. They discovered that without their workers, they would lose money. The farm owners recognized Cesar's union and agreed to discuss higher wages and health care for their farm workers. The farm workers' march to Sacramento became the longest protest march in American history. This indeed was a victory, but there was more work to be done. Cesar defended farm workers and migrant workers and many other cases of unfair treatment. Thousands of people joined his union. His union opened offices all over the country. Eventually, Cesar's union became known as the United Farm Workers. So one thing that Cesar did was, yes, he organized this march, but it had a bigger effect. He used his union to get these people what they wanted peacefully. These people stopped working. They marched. They said, we're not working until you pay us more. And the union representative, the guy in charge of the union, spoke to the owners of the farm and said, hey, give them more money and they'll come back to work for you. Your grapes won't die. And they agreed to. They said, okay, we'll give them more money if they come back to work. We really need them. So it was successful. Later, the United Farm Workers protested against grape growers who used pesticides or poisons to kill insects, mice, and rats on their crops. These pesticides harmed workers who harvested the crops. Cesar called for another boycott of California grapes. Throughout his lifetime, Cesar dedicated himself to working for the rights of poor migrant farm workers who seemed to have no voice in society. Cesar Chavez died in 1993. Thousands of people attended his funeral. 1 year after his death, Cesar was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. His wife Helen accepted the award for him. During his lifetime, Cesar was encouraged his fellow farm workers by saying, "Si sa peda, yes we can," and he certainly did. So he held another famous, notice his age, in this picture he's a lot older, he held another boycott against farm workers who were using pesticides. They're poisonous sprays that get sprayed on the fruits while they're growing.